Have a Bible, would you turn with me to Exodus chapter 34? We're going to start in verse 6, and then we're just going to go from there. And all the rest of our scriptures will be up on the screen. But Exodus 34, verse 6, I want you to have open so you can see where we are and what we're doing here. And as we're in this series, I just wanted to ask a question. How many of you maybe have begun to change maybe your prayer, the way you speak to God? Maybe you're actually calling God by name. Father, Yahweh, as Jesus said, Father, speaking to him in that intimate way. That's what God wants, is that intimate relationship with us. And so I know I find myself in prayer like, oh yeah, Yahweh. Changing that a little bit. So we are in the midst of this new series. We're probably in the middle of it right about now, and we've been talking about God has a name, and we're looking at Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7, the name that God gives, and this is quite possibly the most quoted verse in the Bible by the Bible. And we've gone throughout the Bible so far, and we're going to continue that in this series, seeing where it's quoted throughout the Bible and what that means. And it's based off a book by John Mark Comer, and so we're just going to continue with that this morning. But I want you just to think about, as we start here, imagine you're living in the Near East in 1500 BC. You're Hebrew. You were once a slave in Egypt, but now you are wandering through the desert around Mount Sinai. You live in this spiritually charged universe of gods and goddesses, and these divine beings are anything but nice. And so, if you're in that time, you offer sacrifices to keep the gods off your back, or to get the gods on your good side. And at first, maybe it's a bird or a goat that you sacrifice to the gods. And then it gets bigger. It's like a bull. And eventually, they may even ask for a child, maybe even your firstborn. Do you know the story of Troy? It takes place about 100 years after Moses on Mount Sinai. And I'm going to butcher this king's name, but I'm going to try to say it. And he's the Greek king Agamemnon. Maybe that's how you pronounce it. Close. He's not here to dispute it this morning, so we'll go with that. But he's sailing across the Mediterranean Sea to fight in the Trojan War. But his fleet of ships are dead in the water. There isn't any wind. And Artemis, their god, was angry. And she demanded that they make a sacrifice. It was the king's daughter. And so he does that to appease Artemis's wrath, and immediately the winds begin to blow. Now, is that myth or history? Is it some random weather patterns in a superstitious age? Or is it a cruel Elohim at work here? Right? It's hard to tell. Hard to tell from that. But if you are in and living in that ancient world, you're afraid of the gods. If you live in that time, that's just the way it is. And then you have Yahweh, the one true creator God. He comes to your rescue as a Hebrew. He saves you out of Egypt. He leads you out of the Red Sea and through the Red Sea and across to the desert. And not only that, but he gives you food and water to survive this journey all along the way, and you have done nothing, zero, to earn that from Yahweh. Like, who is this God compared to what they had around there? They were worshiping and all of these things. This God is nothing like all the other gods. He tells you his name. And he's even coaxing you into this relationship with him. Like, he really wants to know you and to be known by you. And then he tells you what he's like. And the first thing that we see here, if you have Exodus 34 open, verse 6, it says, the Lord, or Yahweh, Yahweh. He tells us there that he is compassionate and gracious. And that's what we want to look at this morning, compassionate and gracious, as we go through this line by line. All right? So what we need to understand first off this morning is that in the Hebrew Bible, the order of things is very important. The fact that compassionate and gracious or compassionate and merciful are at the top of this list is Yahweh's character traits. So here's the top. This is the very first thing. This means then that this is the dominant trait of Him. This is the most important thing to know about Yahweh. He is compassionate and mercy. And so compassion and mercy in Hebrew is Rehum Hanan. And it's a word pairing in Hebrew. Not only do these words sound alike, but when they are laid side by side, they're put together, they help explain each other, their meaning. So let's look at this real quickly here this morning. Rehum, or compassionate, is usually translated merciful. It's from a root word meaning the female womb. And so it's the idea here of that the mother's feeling toward her child. So is Yahweh a mother? Does He have a womb? Does He have feelings? Let's see what the Bible has to say. Right? Rehum. We're going to look at this Rehum in the Bible. So there's a story in 1 Kings chapter 3 where there are two women who claim to be the mother of this one child. Both they say they are, but it's in the ancient world where there aren't any DNA tests to find out who the real mother is. So King Solomon comes up with this plan to cut the child in half and give half to each of the ladies. And that should show who the real mother is. And immediately when this plan is thought up and said, this is what we're going to do, the mother of the child says, don't do it. Don't cut that child in half. Give it to the other lady and don't kill him. In the original Hebrew, it reads that she was deeply moved by Rehum, by mercy, her intense motherly love for her child. In Isaiah, we see, and you can see this up here on the screen, Yahweh says, can a mother forget her nursing child? Can she feel no love for the child she has borne? But even if that were possible, I would not forget you. Psalm 103, the Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear Him. So first off here in Psalm 103, it's straight from Exodus 34, right? He's quoting Exodus 34 here, and then he speaks to the Rehum of Yahweh. So Rehum is how a parent feels for their children. And for some people, that just doesn't connect with you. It doesn't resonate with you. Like maybe your family was so warped out of shape that you don't know what a compassionate parent is like. You don't know what that looks like. And so you were never good enough for your parents, or maybe your parents weren't ever around. And so the idea of Yahweh as a parent, it just doesn't resonate with you. But then for others of us, this just taps into the deepest part of your soul. Especially if you are a parent yourself, you know that there is no love as fierce as that of a parent for their child. Nothing else comes close to that kind of love. It's this emotive, marrow of your bones kind of love that's stronger than life itself. And let me tell you, this is how God feels about you. This is how God feels about you. And so Rehum then, or compassion, is a feeling word. And then we have gracious. Hanan is gracious. It's the Hebrew word for gracious. It's an action word. It means to show grace or to show favor. So it's something that you do. It has the idea of help. It's to help somebody in need. And it's this word, we're going to see this in Scripture too, this word. And first off, we'll go to Exodus. We went flying right by Exodus. There's Exodus. It says, if ever you take your neighbor's cloak and pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. And what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. So here in this passage in Exodus, gracious has to do with interest rates on a loan. It's justice for the poor. And then we go to 2 Kings. And we see here in 2 Kings it says, Now Hazael, king of Syria, oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion on them. And he turned toward them because of the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them. Nor has he cast them from his presence until now. And so here in 2 Kings, gracious is saving Israel from annihilation from a foreign army who was coming after them. And so it's a wall of defense. Let's go to another one, Psalm 86. But you, O Lord, are God, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Turn to me and be gracious to me. Give your strength to your servant, and save the son of your maidservant. So here, God's grace is a prayer for God to rescue and save out of danger. For the God who responds to do something, to respond, right? And so compassionate is a feeling word. Yahweh is like a father or maybe even like a mother, and we are his children. Gracious then is an action word. It means like a parent, God comes to our rescue when his kids need help. These are these words. And these two words link up together and they fuse together to show us what Yahweh is like. He's compassionate and gracious. And so when when we come before God in prayer, and we stand and we kneel or wherever we're praying to God, we come before a God who feels, who cares about us. It's a God who acts, who wants to help us. He wants to do something about our situation. And there are three basic ways that we come to Yahweh in prayer. And I wanted to show these this morning. One of those ways that we come to Yahweh is based on what we've done, right? And it's a prayer like this. Oh God, I'm such a good person. I go to church on a regular basis. I volunteer at the church, God. I even give money. And so, God, would you do this for me? And this is a formula way to come to God. And this has the idea that God owes you for the way that you've been living your life. And let me tell you, this rarely works with God. It rarely works with God. The only thing that can effectively keep you from God's mercy is thinking that you deserve God's mercy. It's one of the many reasons that religious people are often the farthest from God, because they think they deserve it all. And the second way that we can come is based on what has happened to us, our circumstances. And so maybe you're just going through a really, really difficult time. Life's not going well for you. You need a lot of help because of everything that's happening. And so your prayer is something like this. Oh God, it's so hard. I mean, it's really, really hard right now. I feel like I'm going through hell and everything that's happening in my life. Like, God, how could you let this happen to me? This isn't fair. And so because of that, would you help me? And what we do is we play the victim card, trying to show God how badly we need his mercy, and so we try to manipulate God to get what we want from him because our lives are so hard. And there is a time and a place for a prayer like this to protest all that is wrong in our lives, but I want to show us that there's actually a better way to pray. The third one, it's based on who God is. It's based on his mercy. And with this prayer, it sounds something like this. Oh God, you're compassionate. You care about me. You're gracious and good. You help. And God, you don't owe me anything. And there is a ton of other people who have it way worse than I do. But based on your mercy, I ask you to do this. Now, once again, prayer is not a formula, and so you don't just repeat that and we're going to get whatever we want from God. There's really not a right way to pray, but Yahweh seems to find a prayer similar to that more compelling than anything else. But is this how we approach God? Is this how we come to God? Recognizing His compassion, His grace, His mercy in our lives. And when we read the Old Testament, talking about God who's compassionate and gracious, full of mercy, we read all these stories in the Old Testament, and it's violent, right? There's a lot of violence in the Old Testament. The ancient world was a cruel, barbaric place, and what we have to understand is that Yahweh was ahead of His people, and He was coaxing them forward into a world where you love your enemy, you don't behead them, right? And so, along this journey, there are a lot of war stories that we read, and they're the kind of stories that atheists use and argue about, and most of us sometimes just skip over those stories and pretend like they may not be a problem. And these stories can be a challenge, and we just can't get around these stories that are in the Old Testament, and we have to they're really sometimes hard to reconcile with the character of Yahweh and the teachings that we see of Jesus. But I think there's an even greater challenge with some of the stories in the Old Testament. And they're the stories of God's mercy. I think as you read the Old Testament, you find way more of these stories in the Old Testament of God's mercy than you do of anything else. It's in the middle of all of the blood and the gore. Yahweh is compassionate and gracious God, and He's constantly at work to rescue and save. And I think we need to keep these stories alive. One of those is about the prophet Jonah. Let's look at Jonah chapter 1. It says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and call out against it, for the evil has come up before me." Now, Nineveh was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire. Assyria was the dominant nation and empire of that day, and they were a constant on and off enemy of Israel. I mean, they've been at war with them for centuries. And the Ninevites, they were the stuff of legends. I don't know if you know about this, and if you're a VeggieTales fan, it was more than just slapping people with fishes, okay? It was way more than that. They were the stuff of legends. And a few decades ago, archaeologists had dug up some things, and they found a Ninevite library. And their writings were nuts. Crazy. Let me just show you a few of these. King Shalmaneser II, he wrote after he just destroyed a city, "A pyramid of heads I reared in front of this city. Their youths and their maidens I burn up in flames." His son, Sennacherib, said this about a kin that he defeated. He said, "I flayed his skin. I spread it upon the walls of the city." One thing that you don't want to have happen to you is to get skinned alive. Don't want that happen. This is what he did. One more. Another king said this about a king that he defeated. He said, "I pierced him in the chin with my keen hand dagger, through his jaw. Then I passed a rope, put a dog chain upon him, and made him occupy a kennel." These were not nice people. This is why Jonah ran away from Yahweh and Nineveh, and he went toward Tarshish. Nineveh was to the east, just a couple days' walk. Tarshish was like the other end of the world. It was across the ocean to the west. It was the last place on the map in the ancient world. Jonah was running in the exact opposite direction to the last known civilization to get away from this. But we have to understand is that Jonah wasn't running away from Nineveh. That's not who he was running away. He was actually running away from Yahweh. Why? Well, we don't find out to the end of the story. And after a run-in with a storm and a fish with digestive issues, Jonah finally finds himself in Nineveh, and he goes around the city and he preaches a one-sentence sermon. His sermon is, 40 days from now, Nineveh will be destroyed. That's it. No story about his kids, no altar call, just Yahweh is going to destroy you all. That was his sermon. But surprise, right? The Ninevites repent. They turn away from their worship of other gods and the violence that they've done and the injustice that they have caused, and they turn to worship Yahweh. the Creator, even the King repents, and he calls for a day of mourning, and the people beg for Yahweh's mercy. And in Jonah chapter 3, it tells us, when God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it. Yahweh changed his mind. Why? Because the God who responds, he responded to what they did, right? There's an elasticity to his dealings with people. He was going to destroy the Ninevites, but when he saw their genuine repentance, he had mercy and compassion on them, and he changed his mind, and the city went on to enjoy a long life. And this is where you would think, all right, Jonah's like, he's ecstatic, like he was a part of one of the greatest moves of God in history, like he would be so full of joy over this. But instead, he goes into a temper tantrum. And he vents to Yahweh, and he says, this is why I ran away in the first place. Like his worst fears had come to pass. And then he quotes from Exodus 34, and we see this in Jonah 4. He says, I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Let me tell you all that. This is so good, this story of Jonah. Jonah is angry at Yahweh. Why? It's because Yahweh is compassionate and gracious even to his enemies. Because God by nature turns back from destroying people. He responds to all sorts of people, no matter who they are. And here's the point of this story. We all love a God who's compassionate and gracious to us, right? And even with our friends. But what about when God is merciful to our enemies? To the people who skin our kings, burn our women, and take our children off to slavery? What about then? What about when God shows mercy to people who hurt us, who stomp on us, who gossip behind our backs, who lie about us to the boss, who betray us, who divorce us, who abandon us? What about those people? What about when God's merciful to them? And that's the problem with Yahweh. You just can't trust him to keep back his blessing from people who don't deserve it. Like he goes around blessing all sorts of disagreeable people. People who aren't religious or even spiritual or even good. And it's because he is gracious and compassionate to everyone. This is who Yahweh is. And most of us, we want mercy for ourselves and we want justice for everybody else. If you don't think that's true, take a look at yourself a little bit, right? That's what we want. We want mercy for ourselves, justice for everybody else. And when I look, I see that I'm living proof of that, right? And the odds are that you probably are too. And who am I to say that I deserve God's blessing any more than anybody else, the next person? Because when I look at myself and I see all sorts of areas where I blew it in a relationship, where my innocence was just a myth, that I wasn't a victim in this situation. I played a part in this. And when I finally achieved peace was by daily coming back to this recognition that it's all mercy. It's all mercy. Now, Yahweh is just, and he does get angry, and we're going to see that probably next week, okay? But just know that Yahweh's base emotion toward us and toward you is mercy. It's mercy. And we see this all throughout the teachings of Jesus. One of Jesus' most disturbing and unpopular teachings was on nonviolence and loving your enemy. You see it in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Matthew chapter 5. Jesus is speaking and preaching here. He says, you've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I think even today a lot of people have trouble with this statement. It's one thing not to kill your enemy, but to love them? I think a lot of Americans would prefer to bomb our enemies or send a drone strike on them instead of love them. Anything but that. But for Jesus, this isn't some abstract idea. It's a concrete reality grounded in Yahweh's character. You go on to verse 45, and he says, "For Yahweh makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust." Now, this was written to a society where the sun and the rain were a gift from God. Okay? We needed those things, and God gave them as a gift. And so Jesus was essentially saying that every time the sun came up and the rain came down, that was God loving his enemies. Because God, by nature, is merciful. In Luke chapter 17, it says, "He was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, 'Jesus, Master, have mercy on us.' In Luke chapter 18, a blind man was begging on the side of the street, and when Jesus came by, he said, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.' In Matthew chapter 17, a little boy was under the control of a demon. He was suffering from epilepsy and self-abuse, and his father, desperate for healing of his son, he falls on his knees before Jesus and he prays, 'Lord, have mercy on my son.' And in story after story, people come to Jesus begging for mercy, and they go away healthy and free. But you see, Jesus wasn't just about healing people just because he's a nice guy. I think a lot of people, when they look at Jesus, they think of Jesus as the first century equivalent of Mr. Rogers, where I assume that Jesus was really a joy to be around and a good person. He also got angry, very angry at times. And so Jesus' mercy doesn't come from this laid-back personality that he has. It's actually born out of his character, Yahweh's character. It's who he is. Jesus shared a story in Luke chapter 15. It's about a father and 2 sons. One of the sons is a wild party animal. The other one is a self-righteous snob. And the wild son asks for his inheritance early, which in the ancient honor-shame culture, this was the ultimate act of dishonor. He's essentially asking his dad, "Hurry up and die so I can have what's coming to me." In a shocking twist, the father, who we find out pretty quickly in the story is a picture of Yahweh, he says yes to this request. And the son sets off for a distant country, and then he just blows through his wealth in wild living. Meanwhile, the older brother, he stays at home to be a good son and work in the field. And the other son, he runs out of money. His life goes belly up. He lands in poverty, and he's eating pig food. Finally, he comes to his senses, and he says, "I should just go back home. I'm going to beg my father for mercy. I don't deserve it, but I'm going to beg for it and see what he does. Maybe I could be a servant." But when he gets close to home, his father sees him off in the distance, and he's filled with compassion for his son. He runs to his son. He throws his arms around his son, and he kisses him. And usually we read this story and we think of it more about the 2 sons. But what if it's actually more about the father? See, the son has done everything to break his father's heart, but the father's compassion is unshakable. And this is Jesus' view of Yahweh. This is who Yahweh is. This is who the Father is, Jesus is saying. For Jesus, God is a merciful parent who feels deeply about his children. The kind of dad who sees his wayward son off on the horizon, and he goes after him, running to meet him just because he can't stand another moment without his son. Ready to give him a hug. And Jesus had a name that he used for God that he always said over and over and over again. It was Father. Father. And so for Jesus, the primary way to relate to God is as sons and daughters in our Father's lap, in our Dad's lap. It's in trust, in vulnerability, in intimacy, in relationship and love. And as I said in the first week of this, who God is has staggering implications for who we are. To know who God truly is so that we can live in that. And there's this deeply Hebrew idea that goes all the way back to Moses on top of Mount Sinai. And in the oldest rabbi writings of Exodus 34, 6 and 7, the rabbis talk about the imitation of God, how it's Israel's job to image God, to copy, to emulate, to mimic what God is like to the world. So they thought that the way that the world would understand what God is like is having seen it in God's people and the way that they lived. So what we see here is Exodus 34 isn't just a ground zero for our theology of who God is, it's also a declaration of how God's people are to live. God is compassionate, so we are to be compassionate. God is gracious, so we are to be gracious too. There is this rationale of Jesus for why we are to love our enemies. We saw this already, but let's go back to it. It's in Matthew 5. He says, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven." The word sons or children there can be translated heirs. We aren't just God's children, but we are heirs of God, the royal children of Yahweh himself. And the family name's at stake. It's our job and our responsibility to carry the family's honor, to represent our Father to the world. In Luke, his version of this story, Jesus adds on, "You must be compassionate even as your Father is compassionate." You see, the world needs mercy. A lot of it. A lot more than what they have right now. And we need sons and daughters of the Father to go out and show his mercy to the world. Like, mercy is one of those things that you just can't get enough of, right? We need it. And for some of you, though, like, that's your spiritual gift, to give mercy to people. Some people, that's like the furthest thing from you, is to show mercy to people. But we all need to learn that this is who God is. God is merciful. And when you think about how you feel towards your own children, if you have them, think about all that they did when they were newborns, or as they are newborns. Like, all they do is eat, poop, and sleep. And they keep you up at night, all night. And all you can do is love them and kiss them and take care of them. Can you imagine how God feels about you? His children, his child? Can you grasp that this morning? Let me ask you this morning, who are your enemies? Who are your enemies? Like the people who abuse you, who stomp on you, who trash talk to you, who make your life a living hell? The people that you hate? What would it look like to show mercy to those people? Even love them? Well, I would say let's start with this one. Let's forgive them. Well, Pastor, you don't know. They're not even sorry for what they've done. Doesn't matter. Release them from your thirst for justice. And then pray for them. And then don't pray, oh God, let them get a flat tire on the way home, or that they go through bankruptcy or anything like that. Even though you want to pray for justice, actually pray for mercy over their lives. Pray for blessing and then get ready for God to answer that. And so who are the people that you have the opportunity daily to show mercy to? Who are they? It's the people that you rub shoulders with. It's the people at maybe the office or the gym or our church or even at home who need mercy. And let me just give you a hint, and you see it up on the screen. They are usually the people who annoy you the most. Those are the ones. If you have a wedding band on, that's your spouse. Marriage is the art of learning to forgive and over and over and over again. And marriage only works when nobody is keeping score, when nobody wins or loses, where every day is a day to receive and give mercy. And when your spouse messes up, and they will, when they do something to annoy you, do you show mercy to them? If you're a parent, then every day you have the chance to show mercy. Parents, one of the most important jobs that you have is to show your kids the character of Yahweh and what Yahweh is like. And if you love them well, it will make it so much easier for them to believe in a God who is compassionate. But if you're cranky and you are always biting off their heads, and then you tell them that God is their Father, don't expect that to stick in or to sink in. One of the greatest gifts that you can give your children is to raise them so well that they have as little unlearning to do as possible when they grow up, especially when it comes to God. Or maybe you're single, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a roommate, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's even a parent. Right? Difficult people are never hard to find. There's plenty of them to go around. They're just there. And they're probably one that's on your street or at your work or even at church. They're there. People who annoy you. And so the question is who has God put into your life to frustrate you and rub you the wrong way? And every time you see them, every time they annoy you or upset you or make you mad, it's an opportunity for you to be like God, to show them mercy. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Let me also ask, do you honestly believe that God is your Father? That He's good? Do you believe that to be true in the deepest part of your being? That God is like a parent, and He feels compassion for you. He's gracious. He wants to help you. And so there's this claim about who we are or how we are to approach God. We're to approach God who speaks worlds into existence. We're to approach Him with confidence because He's our dad. We come to the throne of grace not as beggars off the street, but as sons and daughters, royal heirs to the kingdom. And so confidence is how we come to God. Let me ask you, where do you need mercy in your life today? Where do you need mercy? Where do you need grace to help you in your time of need? Go to the Father. Appeal to His compassion. Ask for grace. No matter where you have done or where you have been, the Father is already running towards you, arms open, smile wide, and the cooks are already in the kitchen, and they're gearing up for a party. Where do you need God's mercy in your life this morning? If our musicians could come on up and just start playing. This is what we see with God's compassion and mercy and grace. And so there's a lot of things that we see in this morning, and one of those is maybe we need to forgive somebody in our lives this morning. Maybe we need to forgive more than one person in our lives this morning.
No.
And to release them from our thirst of justice. Maybe the relationship doesn't really change right off the bat, but you just begin to pray for them. Maybe you need mercy in your life for something that you're going through and that it's been difficult right now. And you need to know that God has not abandoned you, because he doesn't abandon you. He's with you and he's ready to help. Maybe you just need to see God like he's coming to you. So remember that. Would you pray for his mercy this morning? God is compassionate. He's full of mercy. Let's not leave this time this morning, if we need his mercy, to go after it, to ask God for it, to trust in him, that he is a God who works, a God who responds, a God who loves us. And we can turn to him, knowing that he's already running toward us. So as our musicians play and sing, if you need to just ask God to forgive somebody, do that this morning. If you need God's mercy in some other way, would you just ask him for that this morning? He is willing and able to meet you right where you're at. And then when we're done here, this song, I'll come up and I'll close this in prayer. And if you need prayer, any extra prayer at that time, I'd love to pray with you. But at this moment, run to God for his mercy.